Pat Garrett is a name that resonates through the annals of American history. Known primarily as the lawman who brought down the infamous outlaw Billy the Kid, Garrett's life was anything but ordinary. He walked a fine line between hero and villain, navigating a tumultuous era filled with gunfights, lawlessness, and shifting allegiances in the Wild West. His story is not just about chasing outlaws, it's also about friendship, betrayal, and the complexities of justice. As we delve into Pat Garrett's early years, his career as a lawman, and his later pursuits beyond hunting Billy, you'll discover why this figure remains etched in our collective memory. Let's explore how one man's quest for order amidst chaos contributed to shaping an iconic narrative that still captivates audiences today. Pat Garrett was born in a turbulent time, in the heart of Alabama, in 1850, when the Wild West was still shaping men and stories. Son of John Lumpkin Garrett and Elizabeth and Jarvis, he was the second of 5 children, a childhood already burdened with family expectations. At the age of 3, his family moved to Louisiana, where his father purchased a plantation. However, the Civil War brought financial ruin, forcing young Garrett to forge his own path. During this phase, his life began to align with the destiny of many men of the Wild West, to create his own legend. Pat Garrett would not just be another man, but the bounty hunter of the Wild West. In 1867, at 16, he experienced a great loss when his mother passed away. This profoundly impacted his life, pushing him toward a solitary journey through western Louisiana. Garrett began to shape himself like those rugged, resilient characters who did not bow to adversity. It was in this context that, moving forward, he found himself leaving his family home, a decision he had the courage to make. Garrett, however, knew that to survive and thrive in the Wild West, he would have to leave behind not just his homeland, but also part of his innocence. The Wild West does not forgive weaknesses, and Pat Garrett soon found himself facing a new life. The early years in the West were harsh but taught him valuable lessons, those that shaped the bounty hunters and sheriffs of the Wild West. With each new hardship, he learned that survival required more than physical strength. It demanded cunning, resilience, and a certain emotional desperation. The journey had just begun, and there was much more to come. Buffalo Hunter. For 7 years, Pat Garrett's whereabouts were shrouded in mystery. It was in 1876, in Texas, that he emerged as a buffalo hunter, a popular activity among men of the Wild West. As the Wild West shaped its own heroes and villains, Garrett once again found his path. A notable episode from this time was his confrontation with Joe Briscoe, another buffalo hunter. The altercation resulted in Briscoe's death, leading Garrett to face justice in Fort Griffin, Texas. However, due to his reputation, attempts to prosecute him were thwarted. He was a man who knew how to navigate the turbulent waters of law and morality, an essential trait for any bounty hunter of the Wild West. With buffalo hunting in decline in Texas, Garrett decided to move to the New Mexico territory. This change was crucial in his trajectory, as it led him to cross paths with iconic figures of the Wild West. Arriving in Fort Sumner, Garrett found work as a bartender, a job that allowed him to observe the movements of other men who, like him, sought survival in a still not fully civilized territory. It was also during this period that he met Billy the Kid, though he did not yet know that destiny would place them on opposite sides of one of the most famous stories of the American West. Working as a cowboy for Pedro Menard Pete Maxwell, Pat Garrett was shaping his confidence as a man of action and precision. His life as a buffalo hunter may have begun as a search for sustenance, but it led him to forge a name that would echo for generations. If you think the Wild West was only about shootouts and chases, this phase of Garrett's life shows that much of the glory of men of that era was also in their ability to survive the most common challenges. He was just beginning to forge his path. Family life. Pat Garrett's personal life was marked by tragedies and new beginnings, like many in the Wild West. In 1879, Garrett married Juanita Martinez, but fate showed its cruel face. Right after the ceremony, Garrett was dancing with his young wife in front of all the guests when she suddenly felt ill and fainted. Just a day after sealing their union, Juanita passed away at 19 years old. This brutal blow deeply affected Garrett, But, like the men of the Wild West, he learned to move on, as mourning was not a luxury many could afford in that unforgiving territory. Despite being surrounded by friends like Billy the Kid and others, the loss of Juanita was a scar he carried for a long time. Garrett's second marriage brought more stability. In January 1880, he married Apolinaria Gutierrez, with whom he had 8 children. This phase of his life brought the opportunity to build a family, something rare for those living as bounty hunters or sheriffs of the Wild West. The family routine contrasted with his public life of action and violence, but also anchored him in something deeper. As someone who chased men for a living, Garrett knew that home was where he could let his guard down, even though the Wild West did not allow for rest for long. However, his family life was far from a permanent refuge. While serving as sheriff of Lincoln County, Garrett was in relentless pursuit of Billy the Kid, one of the most notorious figures of the Wild West. This conflict between his personal life and his duties as a lawman placed Garrett at the center of one of the most famous stories in American history. He was not just a man who killed Billy the Kid, but also a father and husband who struggled to balance the two worlds. And this balance would soon prove even more challenging. The greater challenge was yet to come: Pat Garrett's pursuit of Billy the Kid, undoubtedly one of the most emblematic events of the Wild West. Appointed sheriff of Lincoln County in 1880, Garrett immediately took on the responsibility of capturing the infamous outlaw. Billy the Kid, or William Bonney, became a legend after the Lincoln County War, being wanted for various murders. Garrett, as a bounty hunter of the Wild West, used his skills and experience to track the young bandit, who was as slippery as he was dangerous. Over the months, Garrett and his group faced difficulties at every turn, but their determination remained unwavering. In December 1880, the first major confrontation between Garrett and Billy the Kid's gang occurred in Fort Sumner. Despite the intense gunfight, Billy managed to escape, but this only increased Garrett's determination. A few days later, at Stinking Springs, he surrounded Billy's group, resulting in the capture of most of them, including Billy himself. It was an important victory for Garrett, who was now gaining fame as the man who could finally put an end to the Kid's crime spree. However, the Wild West, with its unexpected twists, soon brought new challenges for the bounty hunter. On July 14, 1881, Pat Garrett finally found Billy the Kid in Fort Sumner, ending the chase that would define him forever as the man who killed Billy the Kid. The final confrontation between the two was brief but intense, with Garrett firing the shot that went down in history. The death of Billy the Kid was surrounded by mystery and controversy, but for Garrett, it represented the end of an era. Though many saw him as a hero, others viewed him as a villain, which only underscored the complexity of the roles men played in the Wild West. Texas Ranger. After the death of Billy the Kid, Pat Garrett's life took several turns. In 1882, Garrett decided not to run for re-election as sheriff of Lincoln County. He then moved to Texas, where he tried to enter politics, but his attempt to secure a seat in the state failed. Even with this disappointment, he did not stay away from action for long. Shortly after, Garrett was appointed captain of the Texas Rangers, one of the most feared and respected forces in the Wild West. Although his tenure as a ranger lasted less than a month, this period brought new experiences and proved that the spirit of a bounty hunter of the Wild West never dies. However, like so many men of the Wild West, Garrett was always in search of new opportunities. In 1885, he returned to New Mexico, where he discovered a large artesian water reservoir near Roswell. Seeing a golden opportunity, Garrett and his partners formed the Pecos Valley Irrigation and Investment Company. This venture promised to revolutionize the region and bring great wealth, but like many businesses of the time, the company faced difficulties and eventually failed. The Wild West was not a place for simple dreams, and Garrett knew that, but he continued to pursue new opportunities even in the face of adversity. The following years were marked by financial highs and lows, but Garrett never lost his determination. He continued to invest in projects, although many met the same fate as his previous efforts. The Wild West was not kind to those who dared to dream big, but Garrett refused to give up. His ability to reinvent himself, even when the odds were against him, was an admirable quality. However, with each failure, the pressure increased, and the choices he would make in the following years would lead to a tragic and unexpected development. Much like the disappearance of Fountain and his son Henry, the mysterious disappeared from his son. In 1896, the disappearance of Colonel Albert Jennings Fountain and his son Henry marked one of the most intriguing and mysterious investigations of the Wild West. They vanished in the White Sands region of New Mexico, and despite the efforts of Apache scouts and the famous Pinkerton Agency, their bodies were never found. The Wild West was a place where legends mingled with reality, and the disappearance of Fountain and his son Henry quickly became one of those stories that intrigued everyone. Pat Garrett, now sheriff of Dona County, was tasked with solving the mystery. He dedicated 2 years to gathering enough evidence to arrest the main suspects, but the case was far from resolved. Garrett was no stranger to dangerous confrontations, and the Fountain case soon brought him face to face with Oliver M. Lee and James Gilliland, dangerous and experienced men of the Wild West. In the early hours of July 12, 1898, Garrett and his group of deputies attempted to capture the suspects at Wildy Well. However, Lee and Gilliland were already prepared and managed to ambush Garrett and his men. During the ensuing gunfight, one of Garrett's deputies, Kearney, was fatally shot, and Garrett himself was wounded. Even while injured, he decided to negotiate a truce to save Kearney's life, but unfortunately, the deputy did not survive his injuries. This episode only added to the tension and mysteries surrounding the Fountain case. The following months were marked by chases and escapes, but Lee and Gilliland remained fugitives. Finally, 8 months later, they surrendered to Sheriff George Curry and were found innocent. The Fountain case, however, was never officially resolved, and Garrett continued to carry the weight of this failure on his record. The Wild West was unforgiving, and even the most skilled men, like Garrett, could not escape its traps and enigmas. Nevertheless, he would move forward, knowing that other challenges awaited him. Pat Garrett's last days. The last years of Pat Garrett's life were marked by financial difficulties and disappointments. After his tenure as customs collector in El Paso, he returned to New Mexico with his family but faced great challenges. His ranch was mortgaged and, in a short time, auctioned off for the paltry sum of $650. Although Garrett had been a respected figure in the Wild West, the weight of his defeats began to accumulate. To make matters worse, his relationship with a woman named Mrs. Brown, a controversial figure in local society, caused him to lose the support of the then territorial governor of New Mexico, who had promised him a position as superintendent of the territorial prison. With financial pressure mounting, Garrett entered into a final conflict that would end up costing him his life. The discord centered around a land lease contract signed by his son, Dudley Garrett, and Jesse Wayne Brazel. Brazel brought a large number of goats to the ranch, which caused discontent among the local cattle ranchers, including Garrett himself. The debate between the parties seemed irreconcilable, and mediation attempts by influential figures like James B. Miller and Carl Adamson were not enough to calm the situation. On February 29, 1908, Garrett met with Adamson and Brazel to discuss the situation, but a tragedy occurred. During a return trip to Las Cruces, Garrett was ambushed and shot dead, but the identity of the killer remains shrouded in controversy. While Brazel initially confessed to the crime, claiming self-defense, many believe the truth about Pat Garrett's murder was never revealed. The death of the man who killed Billy the Kid marked the end of an era in the Wild West, but left numerous unanswered questions. Garrett was buried next to his daughter Ida in a cemetery in Las Cruces, marking the end of a life filled with legends, intrigue, and tragedies.